Hi, everybody. My name is KaeLyn Rich, and I am the author of Girls Resist, a guide to activism, leadership, and starting a revolution. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I wish I could be with you in person, but that's just not the way things are right now, so I'm really glad we could come together this way. I wrote this book in 2018. It is available at your library, and I can't wait to share it with you. I'm going to read a little bit from the intro to the book. I'm going to talk about who I wrote it for and why. Then we're going to do a little activity together from the first chapter of the book. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me everywhere on social media at KaeLyn Rich, which is my name. You can also, of course, get in touch with me through the library, send your questions that way, and I would love to connect. So, without further ado, this book is for girls. This book is for girls who have something to say, girls who have something to get off their chests, for girls who are ready to use their voices to slash through injustice. This book is for girls who want to live boldly, who have a red-hot fire deep down in their gut, who are smart enough to be mad and bold enough to demand change. This book is for girls who have had enough of inequity, who believe in a world where all people are treated fairly, who care deeply about their own rights and the rights of others. This book is for girls who are loud, who are quiet, who are shy, who are outgoing, who are book smart, who are street smart, who are funny, who are serious, and who are a little bit of all of the above. I wrote this book for girls, and by that I mean the broadest definition of the word girls. Girls, cis and trans, anyone who might consider themselves a girl, including non-binary girls, demi-girls, and also people just generally of marginalized genders who have not always had access to a mentor around how to do activism, or who haven't had the ability to see themselves in stories about our past, future, and present. Obviously, I wrote this book, though, specifically for girls who are often left out of the conversation. We're left out of the history books. We don't learn about the people who came before us. We certainly don't get connected to ways to use our voices. We really have to fight to find our voice and then use it, right? So I wrote this book to share with you just information about how to become an activist, or how to level up your game if you already are one. But I want it to be very accessible to anyone who is maybe for the first time thinking about, I'm ready to make some change, and maybe I don't even know where to start. And this book gives you a place, even just to start thinking through, there's so many things out there wrong in the world, how can I start doing something today? And there is stuff you can do today, right now. This book is a great companion to many other great books that are about that history we don't get taught. Girl activists who've changed the world, people of many genders who've changed the world that get written out of our history books. So there's lots of good books like that, and this is sort of the counterpart of yeah, I am fired up, I'm already ready to go, and how do I get started? And I really try to give you the answers here. I want to be clear, though, this isn't a book to tell you what to do. I feel really strongly that young people know way better than I do about how to make change in this world in 2022. I am, officially too old to know what is the right way forward. I really believe people younger than me understand more than me what we need right now, and we need to listen to them. This book is just to give you some basic tools, because so often for girls and for people of marginalized genders, we don't get that kind of mentorship in life. We don't see ourselves in stories like I just talked about. We also don't get told, we're not given permission to use our voice, even to figure it out for ourselves, and therefore we don't often find mentors or older adults between generations who can share knowledge with us. So I consider this a two-way exchange in that I don't expect to have the answer for what you should do. I think you are going to show us and people of my generation the right way forward. What I do want to do is just give you some, a basic starting place, right? I think of it like a basic cake recipe. Here is just some stuff that I learned over 15 years of being an activist and organizer myself. Everything from how to write a press release, to how to develop messaging points, how to create a campaign plan from scratch. What's the difference between a tactic and a strategy? Why is it important to set goals? And then things that I think are really important specifically to those of us who identify as girls or who have marginalized genders, like, you know, really exploring what does intersectionality mean, doing an analysis of power. What does it mean to create power? What does it mean to have or to not have power? And what does it mean to build grassroots power? And then a really important information that if you read one chapter, I hope it's this one, about self-care and community care, taking care of yourself, taking care of others, and making sure that you have the support and the ability to do this work that can be so, so hard. Once you get into activist work, if you're already doing it, you already know it can become all-consuming, and it can lead to something called burnout when you just are stretched too thin. So extremely important is not just doing the work, but doing the work to take care of yourself too. So there's all sorts of tools and tips in here. I think if I show you on this video, it's going to be backwards, but here's some of the chapters if you're good at reading backwards. I'm not going to talk to you all about that today. That would take way too long. But what I do want to do is do one of the activities that we do very early on in this book. So I have, since I wrote this book in 2018, before the pandemic, was touring around to schools, libraries, bookstores, doing presentations for young people primarily. Sometimes as young as 3 and 4, not on purpose, just because that's who came to the event, about activism, about organizing, about the stuff in this book. I found even when I was talking to very young kids, think like 4-year-olds, they already got this stuff that we're going to talk about. Because even if nobody had given them the words to understand what was going on, they already knew that things weren't equal, right? Already by that age, they had a sense of who in this world has more structural power, who has more voice. And when we really got to talking about it, they also already knew that it wasn't really fair. Even if they'd never had that thought before, once they started thinking it through, they were like, yeah, that's not right. So the first thing we do, if I was there with you in person, was I would ask you, and I'm going to ask you now, to think about what is your first memory of activism? So you can close your eyes or you can stare right at me. Think about what is the first thing that comes to mind for you when I say the word activism. It might be a story. Maybe it's like a kind of a mental picture. Maybe it's a word that springs to mind for you. Yeah. So most people have something that comes up for them. Often, whether it's a word, a picture, or a story, it's something about protest. Like seeing a protest on TV, maybe participating in a protest, hearing about or seeing your parents or guardians or grandparents or family members participating in protests. Maybe it's something you saw in the news. Maybe it's a word like resistance or like protest that comes to mind for you. You think about signs, you think about people in the streets. These are all great examples of activism. Activism is a catch-all term that is really anytime you are like standing up for your rights or the rights of others is an act of activism, whether that's on social media, whether that's in person, whether that's through a tactic like protest. The book covers protest and other kinds of tactics you can use to make change. What we're going to talk about now, though, is community organizing, which is a little bit different than activism. It's a type of activism, but activism is not always organizing. So organizing is building towards like durable, lasting change, building power, usually with other people to bring about the change you want to see in the world. But before we can go farther than that, we need to stop and just think about power. What is it? How do we get it? Why do some of us have more than others, right? When I say power, I don't mean like turning an electrical switch on and off, obviously. I'm talking about structural power. So things that the world that we live in, our culture, our society, has deemed more or less powerful. When you open the book to the first chapter, this is one of the first things you see. It's this illustration of a whole bunch of people, and you gotta think of them as just people you might see around your neighborhood. Not famous people, not specific people, just some random people on the street. And I ask people to look at this picture and think about 2 questions. Who has the most power? Who has the least power? So take just a second, look at these pictures of these random people on your street and just think about who has the most power, who has the least power, in your opinion. Awesome. So the good news is there are no right or wrong answers to this. In fact, some of the best answers I've had are ones that I've never heard before they were said for the first time. So I'll tell you first the most common answer. The most common answer is people say this guy in the top middle, this guy has the most power, and this person here has the least power. And they're basing that on a bunch of factors, just based on these pictures. The reason most people come up with that answer, well, it's obvious. We'll unpack it in just a second. But it's because we already know. We already know, even without words, like that some people have more power than others, and our brains can even help us figure out why that is without us even like realizing we're having that thought. That said, some of the more interesting answers I've had over time. I've had people say, more than one person actually, and usually kids, that this person has the most power because they appear to be the youngest. And that means they have their whole life ahead of them to decide who they want to be, to stand up and fight for themselves, and so they have the most potential for power, which I think is an amazing way to think about power. I've had people say that this person has the most power because they seem like they might be like living a little bit outside of the box and making their own choices about how they want to present in the world, and that gives them power in a really meaningful way. They've reclaimed their own power. I love that answer too. Almost all these people have been picked in some way at some time by someone. That said, the most common answer is this person is the most, this person is the least. Not the right, just the most common. And the reason people can find commonality around that is because as a society, not how we feel personally, but as a society, we have deemed that some people have more power than others. And we base that on certain things, right? So if I ask you, why do you think most people pick this person? Even kids as young as 4 and 5 can say, without much prompting, oh, because he's a man. And then if you dig a little deeper, oh, well, also because he's white. Also his clothes that he's wearing, he looks like he has, quote unquote, a skilled job, a professional job. So that means he might have money. That's also something that gives you power. Then we talk about, like, why would this person have less power? They'll talk about same things. So this person appears to be, we're guessing, is a girl. Has black skin, has black or brown skin. So race comes into play. Is younger, so younger people typically have less power than older people. And we can go on and on from there. And as we go through these pictures, we think about, how do we know who has more power or less power? And we know because we see it on TV, in the media, in our own families. We just get from a very young age a sense of what is okay and which things are less okay. Not with ourselves, but by society standards, right? Like, what is the best way that a person can be? And that usually correlates to who is given the most power in our society. So we go through this for a while. We talk about all sorts of different identities someone can have that can give them more or less power in our culture. We talk about things like race. We talk about sexual orientation. We talk about gender identity. Sometimes we talk about immigration status. We talk about class. We talk about wealth. We talk about other things sometimes too. We talk about things that you might not be able to see from these pictures. So we talk about disabilities. And we go on from there for a while. We make a list of who has the most powerful identities, who has the identities that people say, well, these are less powerful. And that can be kind of a bummer, actually, to think about power in this way, because a lot of people, especially people who might read this book, are like me, and we are on that list of identities that has less. It's called a marginalized identity. If you think about a piece of paper on like an old school notebook paper has like this area, and then it has the margins over here. Marginalized means instead of us all being here like on the center of the page, some of us get pushed to the side, to the margins. We're marginalized. And then the people with the most power get like this nice big space, and we're all stuck over here on the sides. So if you're like me and you have several marginalized identities, I'm a woman. I was a girl. I identify as bisexual. I'm part of the LGBTQ community. I'm Korean. You can talk about size, like who has more power related to size. I am like a self-identified fat person, and I'm happy with myself that way, but society doesn't always tell me that's okay. If you think about all of these identities I have that are marginalized identities, it can be kind of a bummer to be like, oh, right, like the world says I don't have as much power. It might make you be silent or think that you don't have the right to speak up. And that's where community organizing comes in. When it comes to changing how power works, changing who has the power, if it's just one person against one person, that's really hard. So if you think about pitting these two common answers against each other, it's very hard to imagine this person coming out on top going 1-to-1 against this person, right? They're younger, they have like all of these factors of marginalized identity that this person does not, it seems, and it's hard to imagine this person winning in like a 1-to-1 situation. Now, if you think about, though, all of us that have marginalized identities, if we start to think about things that are struggles to us, things that hurt us, as being just as important as things that are hurting other people who also have marginalized identities, then we can start building power together. And when you have not just this one girl asking for, demanding power, but this whole group of people and more people standing up and saying, you can't have all the power. We are going to take some of it back. We want some of it back. We deserve better than what we are getting. That is how we can use community organizing to shift power. Another way to say it. When I was doing this program with a group of young people, actually the very first time, before I'd even written this book, like almost a decade before, I was doing this program with some youth, teaching them about organizing and activism, and I came up with a similar activity where I printed out some pictures from the internet, like of just different people, and had them put them in order from most to least power, right? I didn't exactly know where I was going with this activity at the time, but just want to see what would happen. And so they did something pretty similar. They put like the babies at the bottom, the older people at the top, with like, kind of making decisions about where everyone else goes in the middle. And so we came to a similar conclusion. And we were going to move on from there when this one little girl raised her hand and she said, "Miss," and I said, "Yes." And she said, "Okay, yes, the baby," where they put at the end, "has the least power. But if the baby cries loud enough, one of these adults are going to have to come and pick it up." And that is exactly what I mean when I talk about raising power together. When we make our voice so loud that they can't ignore us anymore. They have to give in to our demands. They have to come and hear what we want and give us what we want. That is how we change power. And that is how we use grassroots organizing, collective power, to change systems of power and take power back. So thank you for spending some time with me today. If you're interested in the book, Girls Resist, you can get it from your library or anywhere that you could find a book. I hope you enjoy it. I sincerely just want to get it into as many people's hands as possible, make it as accessible as possible. I'm so grateful for libraries who help me do that. Most of all, if you take one thing from this video, I want you to know that you already have the power within you to make the changes you want to see in the world. And you don't need anyone's permission to take that first step towards finding your own voice, finding your own power right now. Thank you so much for having me.